Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. This time we've got kind of a wild pairing, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
The Machine Stops,
Mhm.
the classic dystopian short story by E.M. Forster, and then
Mhm.
a selection from The Law of One. So we're talking, fictional world ruled by technology,
Yeah.
and then these like spiritual teachings channeled from a supposed higher being.
Yeah. It's gonna be a good one.
Mm.
A lot of interesting connections to be made, I think.
Exactly. I think we're going to find some really cool aha moments. I have a feeling as we go through this. So let's dive in first with the Machine Stops.
Yeah.
I'm curious for you what always strikes you about this story, because it's one of those it always feels so relevant no matter how much time passes.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of eerie, right? How relevant it feels to like our world today, which is so, obsessed with technology. And I think that's what makes it so powerful.
Right.
Forster's vision of this society where people are living completely underground,
Yeah.
totally dependent on this machine for like everything.
Right.
It's like a little unsettling considering, how much we rely on technology in our own lives.
I know, and it's funny because it's not just like the reliance on technology, but it's almost this like this fear of the natural world that they have.
Yeah.
I mean, they communicate through screens. They
Yeah.
travel in these like isolated pods, and even like the idea of direct contact with nature is like repulsive to them.
Totally. They've lost touch with like the physical world,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is so much of what makes us human.
Exactly. And it's that loss of touch. I think that is what makes the story so powerful, because it's not just, a warning about the dangers of technology, but it's really exploring
Right.
what happens when we surrender our autonomy,
Yeah.
our connection to the world around us, and ultimately our free will.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a cautionary tale about what happens when we give up too much control.
Yes, exactly. And so that brings us to a pretty interesting connection, I think, to the Law of One. Now, if you're not familiar, the Law of One claims to be this channeled text from a higher density being named Ra.
Right.
And one of the things that Ra talks a lot about is this idea of free will and its role in our spiritual evolution.
Yes. And this idea of densities, right?
Yeah.
Which are like levels of consciousness
Yeah.
with their own sets of like challenges and opportunities for growth.
Okay. So I like how you're already connecting it, because, you start thinking about the people in the Machine Stops, through this lens of these densities.
Right.
And it's like, are they, have they kind of stagnated in a certain density because they've traded their free will for
Totally.
this comfort and convenience?
Exactly. They've become like cogs in the machine almost.
Yeah. And so that's where I think the Law of One offers a really interesting counterpoint, because Ra, really emphasizes the importance of choice,
Yes.
actively seeking knowledge and experience in order to progress through these densities.
Right. It's all about growth and evolution.
Right. And the people in this story, they seem content to just exist in this state of passive consumption,
Right.
letting the machine dictate everything.
They've become so comfortable with that they can't even imagine a different way of life.
Well, that's what I was going to say. It's like they're almost afraid of anything outside of the machine,
Yeah.
you know? And you think about like Vashti,
Right.
one of the main characters, her son Kuno, starts to question the machine. He wants to
He wants more.
yeah, he wants to go outside. He wants to experience life beyond.
He's the rebel.
But Vashti is terrified
She's terrified of anything beyond her little bubble.
of anything that the machine doesn't provide,
Yeah.
and so it's like,
Right.
is that fear, that resistance to change, is that a symptom of being kind of stuck
Yeah.
in a lower density?
Potentially. It's like they've become so used to being controlled that they can't even fathom the possibility of something different.
Right. It's like they've traded the vastness of experience for this like illusion of safety and security.
Mm. Exactly. And that brings us to another interesting concept from the Law of One, this idea of service to others versus service to self.
Oh, yeah. Raw talks about those two primary paths of spiritual evolution.
Right. And it makes you wonder, you know,
Yeah.
does the society in the Machine Stops represent one of those paths more than the other?
Hmm. I'm curious how you see that connecting.
Well, if you look at them, they're very isolated, right?
Right.
Focused on individual comfort, and they don't really seem to have much empathy or compassion for others.
Okay, so you're thinking they're leaning more towards service to self.
Yeah, it seems like the machine kind of encourages that kind of inward focus.
That's really interesting, and it makes me think about, our own world and our increasing reliance on technology,
Right.
especially social media.
Yeah. Are we being pushed in a similar direction?
Yeah, I mean, think about it. We're constantly bombarded with these like curated feeds
Right.
highlighting individual achievements and aspirations.
Mm.
And, while there's nothing wrong with that on its own, it does make you question if it's subtly shifting our focus away from like genuine connection and service to others.
It's a good point. It's something to think about for sure.
Yeah, and it all kind of ties back to this, this idea of the veil,
The veil of forgetting.
Yes, from the law of one.
Yeah.
The idea that when we enter into this third density reality, we essentially forget our true nature and our connection to the universe.
We forget where we came from and who we truly are.
Yeah, and so I wonder, do you think the people in the machine stops, are they experiencing kind of a self-imposed veil
Ooh, that's a good question.
by choosing to ignore the world outside the machine?
It's possible, right? They've chosen a different kind of veil.
Yeah,
A technological one that shields them from, like, the complexities and challenges of the natural world.
right. They've created this artificial reality that's, safe and predictable, but also very limited.
Yeah, and it's interesting to think about how that might be happening in our own lives.
Right. Are we doing the same thing? Are we creating our own technological veils?
It's worth considering, are we truly engaging with the world or just consuming a digital representation of it?
That is the question, isn't it? And, it makes me think about another layer to the machine stops that I find so relevant today.
Okay, what's back?
It's this idea that the machine, despite being like worshipped as this infallible provider, it's constantly breaking down,
Right.
malfunctioning.
Yeah, Forster kind of hints at the fragility of this technological utopia.
Yes.
Like, the people have become so reliant on it that they're completely helpless when it fails.
Yeah, there's that scene where they talk about the mending apparatus, which is like their version of tech support.
Yeah. Right.
Is totally overwhelmed, and people should just, be patient and do without their creature comforts for a while.
And instead of questioning it, they just accept it as like a natural part of the machine's evolution.
Right. They're like, oh, it's just getting too complex for us to understand,
Exactly. They've given up their critical thinking skills along with their free will.
Right. And so, again, that brings us back to the law of one and Ra's emphasis on, seeking knowledge,
Yes.
questioning assumptions, not blindly accepting information without truly understanding it.
It's like Ra's giving us a guidebook for navigating this technological world.
Yeah.
Be discerning, consume information wisely.
Right.
Never stop questioning the systems we create.
Exactly. And in the machine stops, we have this character Kuno, who represents this kind of yearning, this rebellion against the machine's control.
He's like the embodiment of that human desire for something more.
Yes, and his journey to the surface, when he experiences the natural world firsthand.
It's beautiful.
It's like he's rediscovering something so essential that the machine-bound people have lost.
That sense of wonder and connection.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because, that yearning for something more, that sense of connection to something larger than ourselves.
Right.
That's a key theme in the law of one as well.
Absolutely. Ra talks about seeking unity with the Creator, finding balance within ourselves.
Recognizing that same spark of divinity in all things.
Yeah, and it's a good reminder that despite all of our technological advancements, that essential human quest for meaning and connection, it remains unchanged.
It's timeless.
We're still seeking that spark, whether we realize it or not. And, it makes me think even in our own technologically driven world, that yearning is still there.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we see it in the rise of mindfulness practices, the growing interest in spirituality, and alternative ways of knowing.
People are searching for something more.
It's like there's a part of us that can't be fully satisfied by algorithms and virtual connections.
We crave genuine connection, a
Yeah.
sense of purpose that transcends the material world.
Right, and that's where the real challenge lies, isn't it?
What's that?
How do we reconcile our technological advancements with that inherent human need
Yeah.
for something more?
How do we use these tools to enhance our connection rather than diminish it?
Yeah, that's the big question,
True.
Because
Yeah.
we've seen in the machine stops what can happen.
When technology becomes a substitute for real experience, for genuine human connection.
It's a cautionary tale, but I don't think it's saying technology is bad.
Right.
I think Forster's showing us that it's about how we choose to use it.
Right. Like any tool, they can be used for good or for ill.
Exactly. It all comes down to intention.
Intention and an awareness. The law of one really emphasizes that.
Yes. Awareness is key.
Using our free will to make conscious choices about how we interact with technology.
Right. So it's not about rejecting technology, but about being mindful of how it's affecting us.
Right. And using it in ways that support our growth and evolution.
Exactly. Finding that balance where technology enhances our lives without disconnecting us from the things that truly matter.
Right. Our connection to ourselves, to each other, and to the universe.
Exactly.
So as we kind of wrap up this first part of our deep dive, I think the key takeaway for me is that we have a choice.
We always have a choice.
We can either become slaves to the machine, like the people in Forster's story, or we can use technology as a tool for liberation, for connection, for expanding our consciousness.
And that choice, that power, lies within each of us.
It does. It's about being aware of the potential pitfalls of technology,
Right.
but also recognizing its incredible potential for good.
It's all about finding that balance
That harmony between the technological and the spiritual.
and using our free will to create a world where technology serves as a bridge to understanding, a catalyst for growth, and a reflection of the love and wisdom that reside within us all.
Beautiful. I love that this has been a fascinating deep dive so far. Thank you for joining us. And remember, the journey of evolution is an ongoing one. Keep seeking, keep questioning,
Keep growing.
and keep connecting both with yourself and with the world around you.
Indeed, Adonai.
And it makes me think about this idea of like consuming, in the machine stops.
Oh, yeah.
There's this whole thing about like, the machine provides everything,
Right.
but the people have also become like these passive consumers.
Totally. They're just constantly consuming whatever the machine gives them.
Yeah, and they've kind of lost the ability to, create or even like critically evaluate what they're consuming.
Right. It's like they've become so accustomed to being spoon-fed information and entertainment that they've lost the capacity for independent thought.
And it's interesting because even the things they're consuming are kind of like pre-digested,
Yeah, it's all filtered through the machine's perspective.
Yeah, it's like all these lectures and ideas that are presented to them, but it's all very much within the confines of what the machine deems acceptable.
It's like a controlled narrative.
Right, and it makes me think about, how we consume information today, especially online.
Yeah.
I mean, are we in danger of falling into a similar trap?
It's a good question. I mean, we're constantly bombarded with information from so many sources.
Right.
And it's easy to just passively consume it without really questioning or critically evaluating it.
Especially with things like algorithms,
Right. They're designed to feed us content that we're likely to agree with, which can create these echo chambers where we're only exposed to one perspective.
And that can be dangerous, right?
Definitely. It can lead to a lack of critical thinking and an inability to engage with different viewpoints.
Yeah, and so it's like, how do we,
Yeah.
break free from that cycle of passive consumption?
I think it starts with awareness.
Okay.
Becoming conscious of how we're consuming information and making a deliberate effort to seek out diverse perspectives.
So actively challenging our own beliefs.
Yeah, and being willing to consider ideas that might make us uncomfortable.
Right. It makes me think about another concept from the law of one, this idea of the law of confusion.
Oh, yeah.
This idea that we're not meant to have all the answers.
Right.
That confusion is actually a necessary part of our spiritual growth.
It forces us to question, to seek to learn.
Right. And so maybe that's part of it too,
Embracing the confusion.
Yeah, not being afraid to say, I don't know.
And being open to the possibility that we might be wrong.
And that's a tough one, right? Because we live in a world where, having the answers is so highly valued.
Right, we're supposed to have it all figured out.
But maybe that's not really the point.
Maybe the point is to be constantly learning and evolving.
And that's something that the people in the machine stops seem to have forgotten.
They've become complacent.
Yeah, they've traded curiosity for comfort.
And in doing so, they've limited their own potential for growth.
Right. And it's interesting because, there's this one scene in the story where Kuno,
Yeah.
Vashti's son, he's talking about how he wants to see the stars.
Right, he's yearning for something more.
Yeah. And his mother is like horrified by the idea. She thinks it's dangerous and foolish.
She can't understand his desire to experience the world outside the machine.
And it's like, that's the tragedy, right?
They've lost that sense of wonder, that childlike curiosity.
And it's not just the stars. It's like they've lost the ability to appreciate beauty in general,
Yeah.
whether it's a natural beauty or artistic beauty.
They've become desensitized to it.
And I think that's something that we need to be careful of in our own lives.
Absolutely.
We're surrounded by so much beauty,
Everywhere.
but it's easy to become numb to it, especially when we're constantly bombarded with stimulation.
It's like we need to retrain ourselves To see the world with fresh eyes.
To cultivate that sense of awe and appreciation.
To slow down and really take in the beauty that surrounds us.
And that's not always easy in our fast-paced world.
It takes effort.
It does, but I think it's worth it.
Definitely.
Because ultimately that's what connects us to something larger than ourselves.
It reminds us that there's more to life than just consuming and producing.
That there's a whole universe of beauty and mystery out there waiting to be explored.
And that we're all part of something much greater than we can possibly imagine.
It's like we're part of this grand cosmic tapestry,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. It's a beautiful way to think about it.
And it's so easy to lose sight of that.
Right. Especially when we're caught up in the day-to-day.
Yeah, all the distractions and demands of modern life.
Yeah. But I think it's important to remember that we always have a choice.
A choice.
We can choose to focus on the material world.
Yeah.
Or we can choose to connect with something deeper, something more meaningful.
And it's not always an easy choice, is it?
Not always, no. But I think it's a choice worth making.
Because ultimately, I think that's what leads to true happiness and fulfillment.
I agree. When we align ourselves with our higher purpose, when we connect with that spark of the divine within us,
Right.
that's where we find true peace and joy.
And it's interesting because, in the machine stops, the people have achieved a certain level of comfort and security.
Right. They have everything they need materially.
But they're not happy.
No, they're empty. They're disconnected.
And it's because they've lost touch with their true selves.
They've forgotten what it means to be human.
I mean, I think that's the ultimate warning in this story, right?
It's a cautionary tale about the dangers of sacrificing our humanity for the sake of comfort and convenience.
Yeah. And it's a reminder that true progress isn't about technological advancement alone.
It's about spiritual evolution.
It's about expanding our consciousness, our compassion, our connection to the universe.
Exactly. And I think that's where the law of one offers such a valuable perspective.
Okay, how so?
It reminds us that we're not just physical beings, we're also spiritual beings.
Right.
And that our spiritual journey is just as important as our material journey.
And so it's about finding that balance, right?
Yeah, that
Sure.
harmony between the physical and the spiritual, the material and the divine.
And it's not always easy to find that balance, especially in our modern world.
It takes effort, it takes awareness.
But it's possible.
Definitely. And I think the key is to start small.
Okay.
Make little changes in your daily life that bring you closer to your higher self.
So things like mindfulness meditation, spending time in nature.
Anything that helps you connect with your inner peace, your intuition, your sense of purpose.
And those small changes can have a ripple effect.
They can transform not only your own life, but also the lives of those around you.
And ultimately, I think that's what it's all about, right?
What do you mean?
Creating a world where technology serves as a tool for connection, for compassion, for understanding.
Yeah, a world where we use our knowledge and our power to uplift and empower one another.
And that's a beautiful vision, isn't it?
It is, and I believe it's a vision that we can make a reality.
I do too.
Ah,
This has been such a thought-provoking deep dive.
it has been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you.
Thank you for joining us on this journey. And remember, the power to create a better world lies within each of us.
Indeed, Adonai.